Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to our seminar today. Today I'm going to be talking about two things that I'm sure are very much in the forefront of your mind already. The first of those is exam preparation. Now this is exam term. It might be an unusual exam term. You may or may not be in school currently. Some of you will be learning remotely. Many of you will not be sitting exams in a way that you normally would or you might have expected. Now this is a challenge, yes. Also, it can be an opportunity. You've got an opportunity here to approach exams in a way that will be advantageous to you, especially if you're doing it in an informal setting at school or potentially even at home. So I'm going to be talking to you about that today. The second thing that I'm going to be talking to you about is, of course, summer. Summer is fast approaching, and yes, you need a break, and we all very much need a holiday after a long year of COVID, but it's always an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do something that interests you outside of the classroom, something that's going to make you a more interesting student or a more talented person. So I'll talk to you a bit about how to make the most of those opportunities. So without further ado, let's get started and let's see where it takes us. So as I said, today we're talking about exam season and the summer plans. My name's Oscar and I'm the CEO of Libra Education. Throughout the talk today, our QR code will appear in the bottom of the screen. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, on WeChat, on Zoom, on any of our other platforms, you're all very much welcome. Thank you for joining us. The QR code is for WeChat. So if you want to follow for more talks, more content, more tips, scan that and give us a follow and you can get all the information there. If you're not on WeChat, subscribe to our newsletter and you can do that by going to our website, www.libraeducation.co.uk. So what are we really going to be focusing on today? First of all, exams. Everything to do with exams can be managed. From getting your headset right in the lead up and approach, planning your time, looking at your revision techniques, and then looking through some of the more practical tips about resources, exam technique, and tuition. We're going to then move on to talk about summer schemes, academic projects, internships, and much more as well. So stay right where you are, and we'll be going through all of this detail very shortly. So my first point, really in relation to your headset. Headset refers to the frame of mind that you're in when you're approaching exams. And I want to talk about this first and foremost in relation to your revision. Now, when you think about revision, the location is not the first thing that people tend to think about. What I mean by location is to consider whether you are working in the right place to be most productive for you. If you're in school, you may have limited choice. You have your classrooms, you have potentially a desk in your bedroom, and maybe a specific room in your house for studying. Now, if that's your setup and that's all you have open to you, then maybe you have little choice there. It may also be that you have other spaces like a library or a classroom set aside for revision. When you're studying at home, if you're living at home at the moment, it may be that you have a desk in your room. It may also be that there's a study, a library, or an office that you can work in. The reason I start with location is it can be a real signifier in your mind when you enter a place that this is a place to work. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. Throughout all of my own education, I found it difficult to draw a line between relaxing and revision. And one way that I did that was by having very clearly defined spaces. If I knew I had to do 2 hours of revision, I would take myself to somewhere that was work appropriate. At home, that was a small office that we had. At school, I would go to the school library. It's somewhere without distractions. And by making the physical journey to that space, I was committing myself to that revision. I think it had an added benefit in as much that when I went to that space, I didn't want to waste my time and play on my phone. I went there, I committed to it, and when I left, the feeling was just as good, because as I left that revision behind. So the stress, as much as possible, stayed in that room or at that desk or in that place. It means that when you're there, you can focus, and when you leave it, you know that you can relax. So I would recommend considering the physical location that you work in and making sure that it's the right place without distractions. Next point on here in terms of headset is rest and release. It's so important during exam term that you find those moments of rest and you find those moments of release as well. What I mean by that is it's impossible to work all the time. No one, as much as you might think they are, they're not. Everyone has moments in the day where you need a quiet reflection or a big release of energy. For me, both of those things came from going running. So during exam term, I would always make sure that I was running more or less every day. This was the right thing for me because I was running every day outside of exam term. Sport was of huge importance to me. And so that meant that I could continue that routine, feel good physically, but also mentally, have time away from a screen, away from my notes. When you're running, you can't really revise, but it does let your mind relax. And those ideas that you've just been reading about filter in slowly. So big advice for you at home is to find your own way to rest and release. If you're used to going to the cinema each week, continue to go to the cinema. It's important that you don't try and work every minute of every day. Otherwise, the quality of that time will be quite low. Finally, physical space, leaving and arriving. I alluded to this earlier, but I think it's so important that when you have a physical space or an area that you work in, when you arrive, you switch on, but when you finish work, I think it's equally important to leave it. If you finish revision, don't sit there and look on your phone, because that's not good quality relaxation time. Leave the revision area and go and have quality relaxing time. That could be reading a book, it could be playing on your phone, it doesn't really matter. But I think leaving the physical space that you've worked in is so important, and that's a big recommendation I have to you all at home. Planning your time. Now this is something that is quite personal. Everyone has their own different ways of approaching this. And so I'm going to tell you what works for me. And this is something that I started trying to understand when I was 15, 16 and going through my GCSEs. But I would say it wasn't until my final year of university, my final year at Cambridge, that I really started to understand why this is useful and how it can be effective. And I use something called the Pomodoro technique. The Pomodoro technique is a way of splitting your time into manageable chunks. It involves 25 minutes of work and a 5-minute break. You repeat that 4 times. So you've effectively had 25 minutes of work and a 5-minute break, repeated 4 times, which makes up a 2-hour block. You then have a half an hour break. Now, at that point, maybe that's enough work and you're finished for the day. At university, you have to do a little bit more than that. So maybe you repeat it once, twice, 3 times perhaps. But the Pomodoro technique for me was a way of being really focused whilst I was working and knowing that a break was always coming. The longest you have to wait for a break is 25 minutes. You can do anything for 25 minutes. And it meant that I could focus in on the work, focus on what was in front of me, and then have a good break before coming back to my desk. Now, the Pomodoro technique is not for everyone. Some people it will work really well for. For others, it won't be for you. You may find that the 25 minutes is too short and you don't get into your rhythm. You may find it's too long. It really depends. But I think it's a good starting place and a good principle that you have to have intense working blocks, but at the same time, it's important to take breaks. Now, when you take those breaks, I've always had some golden rules. And again, this is really personal to me, but it got me through my GCSEs. It got me through my A-levels at Eton. It got me through my degree at Cambridge. So for me, those breaks are sacred. When you have those breaks, you have to leave your desk. You have to get away from that physical environment, leave the room and have some fresh air. I also left behind technology because revision these days is about looking at a screen, working on a laptop. It's not much of a psychological break to go from looking at a laptop screen with revision to looking at a phone screen with chats. Of course, you're going to do it, but as much as possible, if you take the phone with you on your break, put it in your pocket, try and find someone to have a conversation with or a walk to have, something that breaks the screen time, because it will help your eyes, it will help your mind, it will help refresh you. Crucially, whatever you go and do when you have your break, it has to stay on your break. If you find something to fiddle with or something to play on, don't take it back to your desk. The biggest contributor here is mobile phones. Mobile phones are the devil for distractions. They're geared and they're programmed and designed to fill our time and fill our energy. I would recommend if you're revising, whether you're using the Pomodoro technique or anything else, leave your phone somewhere away from your desk. Your focus will go up 2, 3, or 4-fold by not having that temptation there. Now, if you want to try the Pomodoro technique out, simply put it into a Google or another search engine, as it's spelled on the screen there, and it will come up with a little tomato-shaped timer. If you click on the timer, it will start off with 25 minutes of work and the 5 minutes of break, and it will have an alarm at each point. It worked for me, it may work for you. I recommend giving it a go. Now, that's how you manage your time on the in the moments, in the small blocks. What about the long term? The most useful thing that you should have and use is a revision schedule. It sounds basic, and it is basic. But grab an A4 piece of paper, plot out when your exams are, and work backwards to say, when am I going to work on which topic? Now start with the subjects. So if you know you have a maths exam in 2 weeks and you have no other exams before or after it, you're just working on maths. But then break it down and say which topics are you going to work on in each maths segment. You cannot afford to be random about this. You need to know exactly which topics are coming up in the paper, and you need to know exactly how to revise them. Now you'll, by this point in the year, have all of your notes, maybe your own notes, a textbook, a revision guide. So use those to understand which topics are going to come up in that paper, and then be explicit in your plan, saying when you're going to revise each of those. Really, this boils down to the final point here, which is quality time is better than quantity of time. You don't need to sit at your desk for 10 hours every day if that time is not being used productively. It's far better to say that you will sit down for 2 hours to study differential equations on Tuesday afternoon. See it's there, do it, and then feel great afterwards. This is as much about giving yourself time off when you've done the work as it is about doing the work in the first place. I see dozens of students every year coming to our office here in London who tell me they're revising, and they sit on their phones revising all day. I would much rather you spent 2 hours revising without a phone and then 8 hours playing on your phone, having dinner, seeing friends. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you have at least 2 quality hours of revision every day. Also on here is blocking time for papers. It's so important to do past papers. It's easy to overlook them, but they have to be done. Well, revision technique. Let's have a think. What do we mean by this? Well, the first thing is organizing early. It's part of the revision process. You need to know that you have all of your resources ready. That means you have to know where the textbook is. You should have a revision guide. And of course, you should have your own notes that you can work from. If you have this, you have a pile of knowledge. If you know all of that, you're going to get top marks. In reality, if you know half of that, you're still going to get top marks. It's about starting the revision period with all of your information prepared. And once you have that, you have a bank to work from. And then you start the revision process. Now, everyone's different, but I'll tell you some of the things that have worked for me. My primary technique that I have used is note-taking and condensing information. If I think about economics at A-level, the very first thing that I would do when I started revision was take my revision guide, and I would go through it and highlight all of the key words or the key ideas. Once, when I was going through it as well, if there was anything that I didn't understand or was unsure of, then I would check it up in the bigger textbook. But that means that by the time I've gone through the revision guide, hopefully I've understood everything and highlighted all of the key words and the key points. From that moment onwards, I should only need my revision guide, which if you think a revision guide is this thick and a textbook is this thick, suddenly I've got everything I need in here. My second step would be to take a pad of paper and make a note of all of the key words. Now, I wouldn't just write the words in, but I would write a short sentence, as short as possible, to tell me what that word meant or what it was about. This is all part of the revision process. Every time you use a word, you're creating new pathways, new neuron pathways in your mind. Every pathway increases your chance of remembering this information. So by writing out those words in short sentences, you have to think about them and you therefore recall them better. Once I'd done that, I'd have maybe 5 pages of notes. I would then go through again on my notes and highlight the key elements. Again, just trying to fire up the neuron pathways. Final stage, I would simply write out the keywords. Now, on that final time of writing out the keywords, you end up with maybe one A4 page of notes. My goal is that by the time I reach that final page, I can link each of those words back to my own notes, back to the revision guide, and all the way back to the textbook. Because you've gone through it stage by stage, you've built up those layers of understanding. So by the day before the exam, you've got a list of keywords, which when you look at them, you can link it back, and that basically is the whole syllabus in one page. That is my top tip for how to approach this. Now, some other methods that really worked for me. Flashcards are fantastic. Put a question on one side and the answer on the other. It's a great way to test yourself. Audio tapes will really work. If you're more of an audio visual learner, make notes for yourself and listen to them back whilst you're walking or cooking, whatever it might be. You have to do past papers. I've spoken to many of you about this in the past. You have to do them, it's non-negotiable. Final thing though is revision posters. And this was something that I never did when I was at Eton. And in fact, I only did it in my third year of university. And it was such a help. Once I'd created my condensed notes, I then expanded on a big A3 or bigger piece of paper, talking about the different parts of that course and linking them to one another. So rather than having just a linear description of words, you then start to create these offshoots of knowledge where you can link this idea to this idea. And it really helps when you're building an essay to visualize that poster and see how these ideas connect. So consider making big posters that you can have on your wall before the exam. Now I'm rabbiting on, so we'll move through these slides a little bit more quickly. But whether you're working in a science or math setting and you're doing calculations, these things are basic and you'll know them already by now, but you have to show your workings. Underline the answer, or at least make it clear. And even if you're unsure, it's better to make some attempt, especially if you have time in the exam, because you never know what you'll be given points for. If it's an essay response, practice structures constantly in the lead up to an exam. You know that if you're writing an essay, you'll have an introduction, 2 or 3 main subject paragraphs, and a conclusion. Don't forget this structure in the exam. If you're unsure of the question, define it in the introduction. Explain what you think the question is asking and how you're going to answer it. In the lead up to the exam, practice doing essays and use the mark scheme to give yourself a grade. And also format your writing using paragraphs and spaces between paragraphs to make each point you're making really clear. If it says make 3 points and you make 3 points in one paragraph, it's easy for that to look like 1 point. If you make 3 points in 3 separate paragraphs, well, look, it's much easier to see the different points if they're in separate paragraphs. It's basic stuff, but an examiner is marking 100 papers a day, so make it easy for them. I've mentioned resources already, but feel free to reach out to myself or one of the team to ask more questions on that. In terms of tuition, feel free to ask for help. That can be a teacher, a classmate, or a professional tutor, and you can scan the QR code and contact me to arrange tuition if you need. Don't torture yourself by feeling like you have to learn it all in one go. Complete independent work between tutorials, but use tutorials to get that knowledge. these are my contact details. You can also contact me via email, which is oscarhardy@libreeducation.co.uk. That's oscarhardy@libreeducation.co.uk. And if there's any subjects that you're struggling with or any particular topics, even if it's tiny, let me know and we'll get this sorted out for you before your exams. Now, I'm rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to have to come back to this in a future week, but I'm going to give you a 2-minute run through of it now. Firstly, summer schemes. We are working with LSE this year to run the Global Talents Programme. I'm actually a judge on the panel here. Now, it's an amazing course. It gives you a certificate from the university, and it has a group for high school students and for undergraduate students. So if you would like further information on this, contact me. We'll pass that information on to you. We have a full brochure for it, but you'll be working with the top professors and leaders from LSE to teach you about running a business, being entrepreneurial, and looking at the marketing, finance, and operations of such a business proposition. So it's really holistic, and it relies on teamwork and leadership skills to be delivered. It's worth also touching on something that a lot of our students do, and that is working on critical studies or research products. Now, there's competitions out there that many of you will be doing, but sometimes those competitions don't interest you. It is just as valid in those cases to create your own critical study or research project. Now, this might be really daunting, but we have tutors on hand who will help you to define your question, build and understand your reading list, plan out your response or calculations, and finally deliver that project. Now, the delivery of the project involves a written presentation, a written essay rather, and a verbal presentation, which is great for preparing for things like personal statements or interviews. As ever, you can scan my direct QR code there and contact me to discuss that. Finally, internships. Now, we set all of our students up with internships over the summer months. They don't have to be big internships. They don't even have to be with big companies. Actually, working with some smaller companies is sometimes more interesting and engaging because you're more likely to get high quality work if you prioritize going for the right company that suits you. When you think about applying for internships, treat them seriously. Remember that you are actually working for them. They want to benefit as a company from employing you. So treat it seriously, put together a good CV and a good cover letter when you're applying. If you're interested in getting internships, wherever you are in the world, as ever, get in contact with me and I'll be happy to help. Now, I hope that that's been useful today. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. If you have any questions at all, reach out to me, and I hope you have a really successful exam term. As we go into the summer, I'll be giving you more advice on how to set yourself up for a fantastic summer that you'll enjoy and it will add lots of value. But in the meantime, thank you very much. Good luck, and as ever, work hard.